I found out that the Sunny Pines HOA was busy constructing 96 upscale homes on the farmland I'd inherited. But when I uncovered my grandfather's original property surveys, their whole project suddenly became legally mine. You should have seen the looks on their faces when I revealed my plan at one of their own community meetings. I never expected I'd have to battle for land that had always been in my family. When Grandpa Joe died last March, I inherited his 200-acre farm just outside Meadowcreek, a place that had been in our family for generations. I lived in the city with a hectic job that kept me from visiting as much as I should have. My phone rang at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. It was Mrs. Thompson, who had been Grandpa's neighbor for 40 years. "They're building houses on your property," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "Big yellow machine started digging just yesterday. You need to come over immediately." At first, I assumed she was mistaken. Maybe the construction crew had simply strayed over a boundary. But Mrs. Thompson never exaggerated. The Sunny Pines team had posted signs all over. "They're planning almost 100 houses right where your east fields are." I quickly threw a few clothes in a suitcase and sped off to Meadowcreek, breaking every speed limit along the way. 5 hours later, I turned onto the dirt road leading to Grandpa's farmhouse. The familiar path now felt different. The once peaceful countryside was disturbed by the roar of heavy machinery, and dust clouds billowed above the trees. When I crested the hill overlooking the eastern part of the property, my heart sank. A fleet of bulldozers and excavators was tearing into the land where Grandpa used to grow corn and soybeans. Workers in hard hats scurried around like ants, marking areas with bright orange spray paint. Near the road stood a large sign proclaiming, "Future home of Sunny Pines East, 96 luxury homes starting at $450,000. I parked and walked toward a woman standing apart from the crew. She was dressed in spotless beige pants and a crisp white blouse. Despite the dusty air, her hair was perfectly styled, and she clutched a clipboard while talking on her phone. "Excuse me," I said once she ended her call. "What's going on here?" She eyed me up and down, as if I were an unwelcome salesman interrupting her day. "We're preparing for residential development," she replied, in a smooth, practiced tone. "I'm Diane Reynolds, president of the Sunny Pines Homeowners Association." She extended a hand, but it was as cold as her smile. "This is my land," I declared, bypassing her handshake. "My grandfather, Joe Miller, owned this farm. He died recently, and I inherited it." Diane's smile never reached her eyes. "There must be some mistake. Sunny Pines Development purchased this parcel last year. We have all the permits and approvals in place." "That can't be," I countered. "My grandfather would never have sold this land." "Perhaps he didn't mention it," she said, her tone almost pitying. "The sale was finalized 9 months ago. We've been planning this expansion for years." My mind raced. Grandpa had been ill during his final months, but his judgment had always been sharp. He wouldn't have let go of his cherished farm without telling me something was wrong. "I need to see your documents," I demanded. "Feel free to contact our legal department," Diane replied, handing me a business card. "I assure you everything is in order. Now, if you'll excuse me, we have a schedule to keep." With that, she turned away and started dialing another number. I stood there, feeling powerless, as machines continued ripping through the soil that had sustained my family for generations. Back at the farmhouse, Mrs. Thompson waited on the porch with a pitcher of iced tea and a worried expression. "They started showing up with measuring tools about 3 months ago," she explained. "Your grandpa was furious. He kept saying they had no right, that they were trying to steal what wasn't theirs." "Did he ever mention selling any of the land?" I asked. "Never. Joe swore this farm would remain in your family forever." Tears welled in her eyes. "I remember the day before he was hospitalized for the last time. He was combing through his old office saying he had to find something important. to protect the farm. His office had been left untouched since his death. I hadn't been able to sift through his things at the funeral, but now I needed answers. The small room reeked of pipe tobacco and old books. Shelves filled with farming almanacs, family photo albums, and decades of careful records lined the walls. "Go on," I muttered to myself. Grandpa had meticulously tracked everything: rainfall, crop yields, equipment repairs, all in his neat handwriting. I wondered where he would have kept the property records. The filing cabinet seemed the obvious place. I opened its top drawer and found folders sorted by year. Nothing about any sale or Sunny Pines. Hours slipped by as I searched. Night fell, and my eyes grew heavy from reading faded documents by lamplight. Just when I was about to give up, I noticed a loose floorboard under the desk. Pressing it with my foot, I saw it shift. I knelt down and pried it open with a letter opener. Inside the narrow space lay a metal box. The key hung from a nail on the underside of the desk. In the box, I discovered the deed to the farm, Grandpa's will naming me as his heir, and several yellowed property surveys. But the most intriguing item was a letter addressed to me in Grandpa's own handwriting. "If you're reading this," it began, "then someone is trying to take what's rightfully ours." My hands trembled as I absorbed his words. Grandpa explained that developers had been eyeing his land for years, pressuring him to sell, but he always refused. In his final months, someone from Sunny Pines had visited repeatedly. The man claimed he needed only a simple signature for a road easement, presenting different papers each time. "I never signed anything away. If they say I did, it's a lie," his letter declared. He urged me to compare the 1910 survey with what was on file at the county. "The truth is in the boundaries." I dug deeper and found the original survey, which showed property lines that extended far beyond what I'd known. According to it, Grandpa's farm was nearly 280 acres, not the 200 listed today. I lay awake that night, mind racing. I spread the papers across the kitchen table and compared the old survey with newer maps. Something strange had occurred over the decades. The eastern boundary had shifted, reducing our land. It wasn't just the area being developed. According to these documents, we even owned land where part of the current Sunny Pines project already stood. At dawn, I knew what had to be done. First, I needed a lawyer. Then, I had to uncover exactly what Diane Reynolds and her HOA were up to. If they thought they could steal from my family, they were in for a harsh lesson. I folded Grandpa's letter and tucked it into my pocket. "I won't let you down," I whispered to the silent room. Little did Diane know, she'd just set a trap for someone who'd anticipated every move, even from beyond the grave. I barely slept that night. By 8 a.m., I was waiting outside the office of Walter Franklin, the only property lawyer in Meadowcreek. His secretary looked surprised when I requested an emergency appointment, but she squeezed me in before lunch. "So you believe Sunny Pines is building on land that legally belongs to you?" Walter asked after I explained my situation. He was older than I expected, with thick glasses and a bow tie that seemed to belong to another era. I spread the documents across his desk. "These are the original surveys from 1910 and the updated ones from 1978. Compare them with the current county records." Walter studied the papers, tracing the boundary lines with his finger. His eyebrows shot up with each new detail. "This is highly unusual," he finally said. He removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "A boundary dispute of this magnitude won't be simple. We need to determine exactly when these changes occurred in the official record." He called the county assessor's office and put the call on speaker. After navigating a maze of departments, we discovered something shocking. In 1984, a minor adjustment, a 10-foot easement for utilities, was recorded. But in 1997, a much larger change appeared, reducing the property by nearly 80 acres. The documentation was sparse, just a form with a signature that barely resembled Grandpa's. "He would have been in the hospital that month," I said, checking the date. "He couldn't have signed that." Walter's face grew serious. "That amounts to fraud. Proving it after all these years won't be easy." "What can we do?" I asked. "We file for an emergency injunction to stop construction immediately, then petition the court to recognize the original boundaries based on these historic surveys. We'll also need a professional surveyor to verify these maps." As Walter prepared the emergency filing, I realized I needed more evidence. I drove to the county records office and requested every document they had on the Sunny Pines Development Company. Hours later, hidden in a back corner of the library among stacks of public records, I struck gold. Sunny Pines wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a labyrinth of LLCs and holding companies. The same 6 names kept appearing: Diane Reynolds, her husband, Thomas Reynolds, County Commissioner James Harris, Planning Board Director Mark Wilson, and 2 others I didn't recognize. The most interesting document was a loan approval from 3 months ago, $16 million, to finance Sunny Pines East, with the land itself listed as collateral, my land. I snapped photos with my phone and drove to the offices of the Meadowcreek Gazette, our local newspaper. The editor, Tanya Williams, had known my grandfather well. When I explained I was investigating potential fraud involving prominent local officials, her journalistic instincts kicked in. "I can't publish accusations without solid evidence," she warned, "but I can look into the approval process for this development." The project had indeed moved suspiciously fast. Back at the farmhouse, I found Mrs. Thompson talking with another elderly neighbor, Mr. Grayson. When I mentioned Diane Reynolds, his face darkened. "That woman is the reason I sold my place," he said bitterly. "The HOA fined me every week for unapproved landscaping. I'd been growing tomatoes there for 20 years. Then they claimed my workshop violated some new rule they invented. The fines kept piling up until I couldn't fight them anymore." "How many others have been pushed into selling?" I asked. "At least a dozen old-timers sold out in the last 5 years. Always for less than market value. Always to companies connected to those Sunny Pines folks." A pattern emerged. Target vulnerable landowners, harass them with fines and regulations, force them to sell cheaply, develop the land, and cash in millions. My grandfather had been their latest target, but he'd been one step ahead. Then my phone rang. It was Walter Franklin. The judge had granted our emergency injunction. "Construction must stop immediately until a hearing next week. Brace yourself. This is going to get ugly," Walter warned. I thanked him and drove back to the site with the court order in hand. When I arrived, the workers were packing up for the day. Diane's sleek black SUV still sat near the site office. She emerged as I approached, phone pressed to her ear as always. When she saw me, her expression hardened. "Construction stops now," I said, handing her the court order. "There's a legal dispute over these boundaries." She scanned the document, her polished composure faltering for a moment. "This is ridiculous. We have every approval we need, based on what we believe are the proper, albeit fraudulent, boundaries." "I have the original surveys," I countered. For the first time, I saw uncertainty flash in her eyes, before it vanished into cold determination. "They prove you're building on land that legally belongs to me, not only the new construction site, but also the 20 existing homes at your clubhouse." The room erupted in chaos. Voices clashed. Someone even knocked over a chair. "This is absurd!" Diane shouted, seizing one of the surveys. "We have permits. We've sold lots. Construction is already underway." I stayed calm as she flushed with anger. "Your permits are based on inaccurate property lines. I've already filed court papers to halt all building immediately." Gerald Fisher, the bespectacled balding treasurer, looked increasingly alarmed as he reviewed the documents. "These boundary markers align exactly with the old creek bed," he noted. "They do look legitimate," she snapped, snatching the papers from his hands. "This is clearly some kind of scam to get money out of us." "I welcome your challenge," I replied, pulling out one final document. "But here's something you need to know. According to these legal boundaries, your own house, Diane, sits entirely on land that legally belongs to me." The room fell silent as people exchanged shocked glances, finally realizing the gravity of what I was saying. A man in the back spoke up. "Are you saying we might lose our houses?" Before I could answer, Diane slammed her hand on the podium. "This meeting is over, everyone out," she commanded, and the board hurried off to confer privately. After the room emptied, a young woman approached and touched my arm. "I'm Rachel Winters. I put my life savings into a lot in the new section." "What happens to me?" she asked, worried. "I'm not trying to hurt ordinary people," I assured her. "This is about righting a wrong." Then, suddenly, Diane hissed from beside us, leaning in close. "You have no idea who you're messing with. I built Sunny Pines from nothing. Nobody takes it from me." Her threat hung in the air as she stormed off, leaving me alone in the silent room. I walked to my car with her words echoing behind me. Yes, I was now an outsider in this town, but she'd overlooked one crucial fact. My grandfather lived in Meadowcreek his entire life, was deeply respected, even by those who disagreed with him, and left me far more than just a piece of land. Back at the farmhouse, I returned to his office. If Grandpa had anticipated this fight, what else had he hidden? I combed through every folder and notebook. In an album labeled Community Picnic 2018, I uncovered dozens of photos of Grandpa with neighbors, local business owners, and families who'd known him for years. Every picture had names scribbled on the back. These weren't just memories, they were connections, people who might stand with me against Sunny Pines. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Parking violation at your property, fine. $500, Sunny Pines HOA compliance." Attached was a photo of my car parked on Grandpa's farm, my own land. This was the beginning of the harassment Mr. Grayson had described, a barrage of paperwork meant to intimidate. But now, I knew their game. And I had discovered something they hadn't expected, Grandpa's secret weapon, hidden away in his files, waiting for the right moment. As night fell over the farm, I sat on the porch where Grandpa once told me stories during summer visits. The eastern fields lay quiet, the construction equipment abandoned under the court order, yet I knew this was only the beginning. Tomorrow Diane would mobilize her connections. The real battle was coming. What she didn't realize was that I had found more than just property surveys in Grandpa's hidden box. I'd uncovered documents that not only challenged the boundary changes, but also revealed who forged them, when, and why. Diane thought she was up against a grieving grandson defending sentimental land. She had no idea she was facing the ghost of my grandfather, a man who had painstakingly documented every shady deal and questionable approval while everyone dismissed him as a stubborn old farmer. The trap was set. All I had to do was let them walk right into it. My heart pounded as I pushed open the glass doors of the Sunny Pines Community Center. That night was the culmination of weeks of planning. Inside, nearly 100 people sat in rows of folding chairs, chatting excitedly about new tennis courts and upscale streets while sipping punch from plastic cups. At the front, Diane Reynolds stood in a bright red blazer, pointing to colorful renderings of luxurious homes on a screen. "Just imagine the swimming pool with its waterfall feature," she declared with a dazzling smile. The crowd applauded, unaware that the documents in my folder would soon shatter their illusion. Taking a deep breath, I strode confidently down the center aisle. "Excuse me," I announced, my voice strong enough to hush the murmurs. "I need to speak about this development." Diane's smile faltered for a brief moment before she recovered with forced cheer. "We'll take questions after the presentation," she said. "This can't wait," I insisted, stepping onto the small stage to face the expectant crowd. "My name is Alex Morgan. My grandfather owned Meadowcreek Farm for 60 years. The old property we purchased," Diane interjected quickly. "We're very grateful to finally redevelop that eyesore." A murmur ran through the room. I opened my folder and held up the first document. "This is the original 1910 land survey," I declared. "And this is the updated survey from 1978, I continued, revealing another paper. "These legal documents show that my grandfather's land extends 80 acres further east than what the county records indicate." I then addressed the HOA board members seated behind the podium, placing copies in front of them. "In short, you are building on land that legally belongs to me, not only for the new development, but also for 20 existing homes in your clubhouse area." The room erupted in chaos. Voices clashed, and someone even knocked over a chair. "This is ridiculous," Diane shouted, grabbing one of the surveys. "We have permits, we've sold lots, construction is already underway." I remained calm as she flushed with anger. "Your permits are based on incorrect property lines," I explained. "I've filed legal papers to halt all construction immediately." Gerald Fisher, the balding, bespectacled treasurer, examined the documents with growing alarm. "These boundary markers match the old creek bed," he observed. "They look real," she snapped, snatching the papers from his hands. "This is clearly some kind of scam to extort money." "I welcome your challenge," I said, pulling out one final document. "But here's something you should know. According to these legal boundaries, your own home, Diane, is entirely situated on land that legally belongs to me." The room fell silent as people exchanged stunned glances, finally grasping the magnitude of what I was saying. A man in the back spoke up. "Are you saying we might lose our houses?" Before I could answer, Diane slammed her hand on the podium. "This meeting is over. Everyone out," she declared, and the board quickly retreated to discuss matters privately. As the crowd dispersed in nervous whispers, a young woman approached me. "I'm Rachel Winters. I put my life savings into a lot in the new section." "What will happen to me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm not here to harm ordinary people," I assured her calmly. "This is about setting right a wrong." Then Diane suddenly hissed beside us. Leaning in close, she spat, "You have no idea who you're messing with. I built Sunny Pines from nothing. Nobody takes it from me." Her threat lingered in the air as she stormed off, leaving me alone in the empty room. I stepped outside, her words echoing behind me. Yes, I was now seen as an outsider in this town, but she'd forgotten one essential truth. My grandfather had lived in Meadowcreek his entire life, was deeply respected by everyone, even those who disagreed with him, and left me far more than just land. Returning to the farmhouse, I went back into his office. If Grandpa had anticipated this fight, what other secrets had he hidden? I pored over every folder and notebook. In an album titled Community Picnic 2018, I discovered dozens of photos of him with neighbors, local business owners, and families who'd known him for years. Each picture bore handwritten names on the back. These weren't just memories. They were connections. People who might stand with me against Sunny Pines. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Parking violation at your property, fine. $500. Sunny Pines HOA compliance." Attached was a photo of my car parked on Grandpa's farm. My own property. This was how the harassment started. A barrage of bureaucratic intimidation. But now, I knew their game, and I had uncovered something they hadn't expected. Grandpa's secret weapon, still hidden in his files, waiting for the right moment. As night fell over the farm, I sat on the porch, where Grandpa once told me stories during summer visits. The eastern fields lay silent, the construction equipment halted by the court order. Yet I knew this was only the beginning. Tomorrow, Diane would mobilize her network. The true battle was just beginning. What she didn't realize was that I had discovered more than just property surveys in Grandpa's hidden box. I had found documents that not only challenged the boundary changes, but also exposed who forged them, when, and why. Diane thought she was dealing with a grieving grandson defending sentimental land. In reality, she was facing the ghost of my grandfather, a man who had meticulously recorded every shady deal and questionable approval while everyone dismissed him as a stubborn old farmer. The trap was set. All I had to do was let them walk further into it. My heart pounded as I pushed open the glass doors of the Sunny Pines Community Center. That night marked the culmination of weeks of planning. Inside, nearly 100 people sat in rows of folding chairs, discussing new tennis courts and upscale streets while sipping punch from plastic cups. At the front, Diane Reynolds stood tall in a bright red blazer, pointing to colorful renderings of luxurious homes on a screen. "Just imagine the swimming pool with its waterfall feature," she said, with a dazzling smile as the crowd applauded. None of them knew that the documents in my folder would soon shatter their illusion. Taking a deep breath, I strode down the center aisle. "Excuse me," I announced, my voice strong enough to command silence. "I need to address this development." Diane's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered with forced cheer. "We'll take questions after the presentation," she declared. "This can't wait," I insisted, stepping onto the small stage to face the expectant audience. "My name is Alex Morgan. My grandfather owned Willow Creek Farm for 60 years. The old property we purchased," Diane interjected quickly. "We're very grateful to finally redevelop that eyesore." A murmur ran through the room. I opened my folder and held up the first document. "This is the original 1910 land survey," I said. "And here is the updated survey from 1978, I continued, displaying another paper. "These legal documents prove that my grandfather's land extends 80 acres further east than the county records show." I then turned to the HOA board members seated behind the podium, placing copies before each of them. "In short, you're constructing on land that legally belongs to me, not just the new site, but also including 20 existing homes in your clubhouse area." The room exploded in chaos. Voices clashed, and someone knocked over a chair. "This is ridiculous," Diane shouted, seizing one of the surveys. "We have permits. We've sold lots. Construction is already underway." I remained calm as her face flushed with anger. "Your permits are based on inaccurate property lines," I explained. "I've filed court papers to stop all construction immediately." Gerald Fisher, the balding, bespectacled treasurer, studied the documents with mounting alarm. "These boundary markers match the old creek bed," he noted. "They look legitimate," she snapped, snatching the papers from his hands. "This is clearly some kind of scam to extort money." "I welcome your challenge," I said, pulling out one final document. "But here's something you should know. According to these legal boundaries, your own house, Diane, is entirely situated on land that legally belongs to me." The room fell silent as people exchanged shocked glances, finally grasping the full implication. A man at the back spoke up. "Are you saying we might lose our houses?" Before I could answer, Diane slammed her hand on the podium. "This meeting is over. Everyone out," she commanded, and the board quickly retreated to discuss privately. As the crowd filed out in nervous whispers, a young woman approached me. "I'm Rachel Winters. I invested my life savings in a lot in the new section." "What happens to me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm not here to harm ordinary people," I assured her calmly. "This is about righting a wrong." Then Diane suddenly hissed beside us, leaning in close. "You have no idea who you're messing with. I built Sunny Pines from nothing. Nobody takes it from me." Her threat lingered as she stormed off, leaving me alone in the empty room. I stepped outside with her words echoing behind me. Yes, I was now seen as an outsider here. But she'd forgotten one crucial fact. My grandfather had lived in Meadowcreek his entire life, was deeply respected by everyone, and had left me far more than just a piece of land. The real fight had only just begun. Through the windows, I saw groups of anxious residents gathered in the lot, and my phone buzzed with a message from Mr. Wallace. "How'd it go?" I texted back. "They're in on it. Brace yourself for their next move." What I never admitted was just how rattled I felt. I'd set the fuse, yet I wasn't sure I was ready for the blast that would follow. These weren't merely properties pinned on a map. They were the homes and dreams of real people, and those dreams were built on land stolen from my grandfather. Sooner or later, someone was going to lose everything, and Diane Reynolds wasn't about to surrender without a fight. I was jolted awake by the sound of engines outside my grandfather's farmhouse. Harsh headlights flooded in as I stumbled to the porch, where 3 white SUVs, sporting Sunny Pines security, lined up and blocked my driveway. Uniformed men clustered around the vehicles. One stepped forward and handed me a heavy envelope. "Cease and desist notice from the Sunny Pines Homeowners Association," he announced flatly. "You must withdraw all claims against the development or face legal action." I ripped open the envelope and found a letter accusing me of using forged documents and attempting fraud. They demanded I compensate for the damage done to the community's reputation. "You can't be serious," I muttered, but the man merely shrugged. "I'm just passing on the message. Have a nice day." He returned to his vehicle, though none of them moved. I tried heading into town for breakfast, only to discover huge concrete blocks had been placed at the end of my driveway overnight. "Sorry, sir," one guard mumbled without even looking up. "No apologies at all," he added. "This access point wasn't approved by the development committee. It's been shut down for safety reasons." I realized I was effectively trapped on my own property. I called the sheriff's office, but they told me they couldn't get involved in a civil dispute and suggested I hire a lawyer. Then my phone rang, and Diane's name flashed on the screen. I hadn't given her my number. "Good morning," she purred sweetly when I answered. "Enjoying the view?" "This is harassment," I snapped. "You can't block access to my property." "Actually," she replied coolly, "county records confirm that the access crossing Sunny Pines common areas is within our rights to control." "Those records are wrong," I insisted. She laughed. "Let me explain how it works. The county commissioner plays golf with my husband every Sunday. The building inspector's daughter works for my real estate firm, and the water department supervisor lives right in Sunny Pines." My stomach dropped as she continued. "By tomorrow, your farmhouse will have at least 15 code violations. Your water might be cut off, and local contractors won't even answer your calls. They know better than to cross me." "That's illegal," I protested. "That's just small-town politics," she countered. "You can't win this, but I'm being reasonable. Withdraw your claims, sign over the disputed acreage, and we're done. I'll even throw in a generous payment for your trouble." "This isn't about money," I argued. "It's always about money, dear. Think it over. You have until tomorrow." And then she hung up. I stared at my phone, and then at the security vehicles still stationed outside. They weren't going anywhere, exactly as Diane had promised. By afternoon, a county inspector arrived at the farmhouse. He found issues with everything: the wiring, the septic system, the porch railings, and handed me a list of violations that would cost thousands to fix, all needing immediate attention. Just as he left, another truck pulled up. Workers began installing signs along my property line. Future home of Sunny Pines East. Luxury living. Coming soon. Later, when I called the utility company, my water pressure dwindled to a mere trickle. They claimed maintenance work was in progress and couldn't say when service would be restored. Then I tried ordering pizza for dinner, and the delivery driver called saying he couldn't locate my address, even though it had always been easy to find. Step by step, I was being cut off. That night I sat on the porch in the dark, watching security lights sweep across the fields where my grandfather once grew corn. In the distance, silent bulldozers waited, ready to continue dismantling his legacy. My phone buzzed with a message from Mr. Wallace. "They've filed a countersuit claiming your documents are forged. Court date set for 3 months from now. Meanwhile, they'll keep building." 3 months? By then, the houses would be nearly complete, and the damage irreversible. I scrolled through my contacts for someone who might help. One name caught my eye, Janet Rivera, a reporter for the local paper. We'd been high school classmates. Though we hadn't spoken in years, perhaps she could help. Before I could call her, headlights appeared down the long driveway. A car skillfully navigated around the concrete barriers and approached the house. I tensed, wondering what fresh trouble Diane was sending my way. The car parked, and out stepped a familiar face, Gerald Fisher, the HOA treasurer who'd scrutinized my documents at the meeting. "I shouldn't be here," he whispered, nervously glancing at the security vehicles in the distance. "If Diane finds out," I urged. "Why are you here?" he asked, then pulled a flash drive from his pocket. "Because what she's doing is wrong. I've been keeping the HOA books for 7 years, and there's a lot you need to see." I invited him inside, away from prying eyes at my kitchen table. He opened his laptop and displayed financial records, meeting minutes and emails. "Diane and the board have been treating HOA funds like their personal bank account," he explained. He showed me disappearing fees, contracts awarded to family members, and reserve funds funneled into side businesses. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Because I'm not the only unhappy homeowner," Gerald replied. "We're all tired of her oppressive rules and control. When you came with those property documents, I saw her fear for the first time." He pointed to a spreadsheet. "Look at these special assessments from last year. Every homeowner paid $2,000 for road repairs, yet the actual work cost only half that. The rest just vanished." "That's theft," I murmured. Gerald nodded. "And there's more. Those 20 homes you claim are on your land. The residents have been complaining about drainage issues for years. Diane keeps promising fixes, but nothing gets done. Now we know why. She knew those houses might not even legally belong to the HOA. As we spoke, my phone buzzed with texts from unknown numbers. "We support you against Diane." One message read from the Millers at 42 Sunny Pine Lane. "She fined us $500 for planting vegetables instead of flowers." Another from the Jackson family said, "Our children's playground equipment was removed without notice. Can we help?" And yet another from the Rodriguezes. Gerald smiled slightly. "I may have shared your number with a few friends." For the first time in this long battle, hope stirred within me. Diane had power, connections, and money, but she'd also made many enemies. "We need a plan," I declared, "and I think I know where to start." After Gerald left, carefully maneuvering past the security vehicles, I watched a light rain begin to fall on the half-built houses in the distance. Diane believed she was forcing me into submission, but in reality she'd helped me gather the allies I needed to win this war. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, I wouldn't just defend, I'd strike back. My grandfather used to say, the best trap isn't one your enemy walks into, it's one they unknowingly help you build. Diane had unwittingly handed me the final pieces of the puzzle. My water was cut off yesterday. Then the electricity followed. This morning, I stood in my grandfather's kitchen, staring at spoiled food in a once-cold refrigerator. Diane Reynolds thought she could bully me off my own land by making life unbearable. She had another thing coming, I thought. I grabbed my notebook and stepped out. If Diane wanted war, I needed every ally I could get. The first person I visited was Mrs. Thompson, who answered her door in a floral housecoat. "They've shut off your utilities," she gasped. "That's illegal, and so is building on my land," I replied. "But Diane has friends at the county office. I need to know who else despises the HOA as much as we do." Her eyes lit up. "Oh, honey, grab a chair. This might take a while." She then handed me a list of 15 names. Families fined over mailbox colors, elderly couples threatened with liens because their grandchildren visited too often, and even a single mother unable to pay a $900 fee for a small safety fence. I spent the entire day knocking on doors throughout Sunny Pines. At first, people were too frightened to speak. But once I showed them my property documents, something shifted. Fear was replaced with hope. Sarah Jenkins, whose garden had been ripped out, invited me in for lemonade. Diane forced my husband to uproot our tomato plants because she thought vegetables were unsightly, she said, her hands trembling with anger. We ended up with a $500 fine. My husband already juggles 2 jobs. The Patel family had spent $3,000 battling the HOA over a porch swing, while the Johnsons couldn't paint their front door the color they wanted. Every house ended up looking the same, beige with white trim. "It's not just the rules," explained Trevor Martinez as his wife Maria nodded. "It's the way they enforce them." Diane drives around snapping pictures of every violation. Some folks get a warning, others get fined on the spot. There's no fairness. By sunset, I'd spoken with 27 families, each with a similar story of fear under Diane Reynolds. I picked up my phone and called Mr. Wallace, my attorney. "Can we legally form a competing homeowners association?" I asked. "On your land?" he queried. "Absolutely," he confirmed. "But what about the existing homes?" I pressed. "That's where it gets interesting," I said. "I'm going to need the community center for a meeting tomorrow night." Mr. Wallace laughed. "They'll never let you use it. They don't own it." "I do, based on my property lines, remember?" I countered. The next day, I printed 200 flyers proclaiming, "Emergency community meeting. Your home may be at risk." I attached copies of the original property survey. As dusk fell, the community center overflowed with 97 families. When the chairs ran out, people leaned against the walls. Diane arrived last, pushing her way through the crowd, her face contorted with rage. "This meeting is unauthorized. Everyone must leave immediately," she demanded. Sarah Jenkins stood up. "Or what? More fines? Haven't you taken enough from us already?" The room erupted in applause. I walked to the front, raising my hands for silence. "I didn't come here to cause trouble," I began. "I came because my grandfather's land was stolen. But after meeting all of you, I see I'm not the only victim." For the next hour, residents shared heartbreaking stories of HOA abuse. Tears flowed, and voices quivered with emotion. Meanwhile, Diane sat stiffly in the back, furiously tapping her phone. "Here's what I propose," I said, once everyone had spoken. "We form the Meadowcreek Homeowners Coalition. Together, we'll negotiate new, fair property lines and draft a community agreement with sensible rules and transparent finances." "You can't do that," Diane shouted. "These homes are contractually bound to Sunny Pines HOA." I held up the original survey. Contracts based on fraudulent property ownership aren't valid, Ms. Reynolds. I'm not here to take anyone's home. I'm here to fix what's broken. The vote was nearly unanimous, and 89 families joined the coalition on the spot as the meeting ended, energized and hopeful. Later, Gerald Jenkins, the HOA treasurer, pulled me aside. "There's something you need to know," he whispered, nervously glancing at Diane across the room. "The HOA finances just don't add up. Monthly dues are rising while our reserves shrink. I've tried to dig into it, but Diane controls all the accounts." I patted his shoulder. "Would you show me the books?" He nodded. "Tomorrow morning at my office." Before long, Diane stormed over, jabbing a finger in my face. "You've made a huge mistake. By this time tomorrow, you'll regret ever coming to Meadowcreek." "Is that a threat, Ms. Reynolds?" I asked. "It's a promise," she replied. "I have the county commissioner, the police chief, and the local judge on speed dial. This little uprising ends now." What she didn't know was that I'd arranged for a reporter from the Meadowcreek Gazette to sit quietly at the back of the meeting. Every word was recorded, every threat documented. As Diane slammed the door behind her, my phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Wallace. "Environmental survey results are in. You won't believe what's on that land." I couldn't help but smile. Diane thought she had all the power, but as my grandfather always said, the truth is the strongest weapon, and tomorrow the truth about Sunny Pines HOA would make the front page. I awoke to police cars encircling my grandfather's farmhouse. Through the window, I saw Diane Reynolds standing beside a tall man in uniform. The police chief announced as I opened the door, "You're trespassing on private property." I smiled calmly. "Actually, Chief Williams, I'm the legal property owner," I said, handing him a folder containing the original surveys and my grandfather's deed. "These documents haven't been verified," Diane snapped. "They have been." A woman stepped forward from a car. "I'm Carolyn Mitchell from the county records office. We retrieved the original surveys last night after receiving some troubling reports." Diane's face went pale. "What reports?" she stammered. I gestured toward the farmhouse. "Perhaps we should discuss this inside. Coffee's ready." 15 minutes later, my kitchen table hosted an unexpected gathering. The police chief, the county records clerk, Mr. Wallace, and Diane, whose flawless makeup couldn't hide her growing panic. Carolyn spread maps across the table. The original property lines were recorded incorrectly back in 1973. This entire area, including the existing Sunny Pines homes and new construction, legally belongs to the Richards estate. The police chief whistled. "That's quite a mistake." "Not a mistake," Mr. Wallace replied quietly. "We have evidence that the boundary change was deliberate." Diane slammed her hand on the table. "This is a scam to extort money from hard-working homeowners." Speaking of money, I slid a folder towards the police. "Gerald Jenkins provided these financial records yesterday. 3 years' worth of Sunny Pines HOA accounts." As the chief flipped through the pages, his face darkened. "Ms. Reynolds, can you explain why $427,000 in homeowner dues was transferred to Sunshine Consulting LLC? "That's our legitimate management company," she said stiffly. "It's registered to your son-in-law," I added, "along with 4 other companies charging the HOA for services. Landscaping, security, maintenance, legal counsel, all owned by your family." The chief closed the folder. "Ms. Reynolds, you need to come down to the station. This is absurd. Do you know who I am? My husband plays golf with Judge Harrington every Sunday." As the chief led a protesting Diane out, Carolyn asked, "What happens now? What about those people's homes?" "I have no intention of evicting anyone, But the development must stop until we can properly survey the wetlands, I assured her. By afternoon, construction was halted. Local news vans lined the street outside the farmhouse, and my phone rang incessantly with calls from worried homeowners. I called an emergency town hall meeting that evening. The local high school auditorium was the only venue large enough, and nearly 400 people, homeowners, laid-off construction workers, county officials, and curious locals, packed the room. The air was thick with fear and anger. I took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone. My name is Richards. This was my grandfather's land. I didn't come here looking for trouble. I continued. I came to honor his legacy. Shouts erupted. What about our homes? We'll sue. My life savings are tied up in that house. I raised my hands. Please, I'm not here to take anything from you. I'm here to offer a solution that benefits everyone. I propose, first, that all existing homeowners receive proper legal deeds. No one will lose their home. Relief murmured through the crowd. Second, the new development will be redesigned to protect the wetlands my grandfather cherished. These aren't just swamps. They're vital habitats and natural flood protection for the area. I clicked to the next slide showing my grandfather's environmental studies. These wetlands are home to 3 endangered species. Building on them isn't just wrong. It's illegal under federal law. A man stood up. I invested my life savings in a lot in the new section. What about my investment? Fair question, I replied. We're establishing a property exchange program. Anyone who purchased in the protected area can swap for an equivalent lot in the redesigned development. No one loses their investment. For the next hour, I outlined my vision for a community that balanced homes with nature. A community with transparent governance, reasonable rules, and fair fees that truly improved the neighborhood. Toward the end, Sarah Jenkins took the microphone. I've lived under Diane's rules for 8 years. I couldn't paint my door blue, grow tomatoes, or let my kids play outside after 7 p.m. because of the noise ordinance. She looked around the room. Is this really the community we want? By the time the meeting ended, over 300 signatures were collected in support of the new Meadowcreek Community Association. Even some of Diane's former allies joined, including Gerald, who offered to help untangle the financial mess. The following 6 months were grueling. Diane hired high-priced lawyers who tried every trick to overturn our claims, but the evidence was overwhelming. In the end, she accepted a plea deal on the financial fraud charges. A year later, I sit on my grandfather's porch watching kids ride bikes past houses with doors painted in every color of the rainbow. The community garden, where Sarah's tomatoes now thrive, buzzes with neighbors sharing gardening tips. Behind me, my grandfather's farmhouse has been transformed into our community center, where classes, meetings, and celebrations take place every day. The wetlands are now protected by a conservation easement, complete with walking trails and informative signs about each plant and animal. Mrs. Thompson joins me on the porch, handing me a glass of lemonade. Your grandfather would be bursting with pride, she says, gesturing toward the area where construction has finally resumed on the redesigned development. Smaller homes, more green space, and solar panels on every roof. While cleaning out his study, I uncovered something. Look at this, I told her, holding up a faded notebook. It's my grandpa's journal from 30 years ago. He fought back against the original developers when they first tried to build on the wetlands. Mrs. Thompson smiled. He always said you were just like him, stubborn as a mule when fighting for what's right. In the distance, a blue heron soared from the protected marsh, gliding above homes where people now live in harmony with the land. Sometimes the best trap isn't about catching someone in the act. It's about showing them a better way to do right. Diane's HOA tried to take my land, but in the process, they gave me something far more valuable. The chance to build the community my grandfather always dreamed of.